Starting. Voila.
Yeah.
Here we are. Thank you, everyone, for coming and being a part of this little knowledge exchange experiment, the Wooden Boatopia Council. And as I was just saying before we started recording, unfortunately, Hanneke can't join us. She's in the boatyard, I believe, working. But we're going to catch up with her offline and hopefully she can join us down the track. And because this is kind of new for everyone.
I also saw a message from Belinda that she can't join us.
Yeah, sorry, Belinda also can't join, unfortunately. But hopefully, you know, we can either have some breakout meetings with them down the track or just, you know, we can also schedule more often if we have fun and it's not too tough for everyone. But because this is kind of new for all of us and not everyone here even knows each other, and also because we're recording to share it publicly, I thought it would be fun to start with some introductions of who each of us are and what the hell we're doing in this Wooden Boatopia Council, what we're doing in the world of boats. So Hanneke, you're in my top left and I like to go like clockwise. So do you want to say?
I'm bottom right at the moment, but never mind. I'll be first. I've probably been in this world the longest, starting boat building in 1968. First boat at the age of 14, my father's boat, which was a Wharram design, a very early one. And still exists, Kiana, a 22
Really?
footer. Yes, it's still around, so it's as old, or if not older than yours.
Yeah, it's older. Cool.
It's in, yeah. So it was only 22 footer, but it's still there. So we built that. So I learned about using resourceable glue and woodworking tools. I mean, I had always been a maker, so I knew about making things, but this was my first boat building. Then I joined James in 1972 really, and I started already doing a lot of boat building then. We were working on a GRP prototype actually, but I built all the wooden bits and cross beams for that. And I remember making some new tillers for our tahini. So, and it went on from there. And then in the late 70s, we built another boat in Ireland, which was a foam sandwich one. At the time, a lot of interest was in that. And it was awful building in foam sandwich, and I never want to do it again. So, so that was that experience. And so from then on, it's always been wooden boat building. And then we went into stitch and glue building in 1980, 81. It was the first little 14-footer, ply epoxy. So that's my first epoxy experience. And this 14-footer was built with just 5 kilos of West epoxy, which I very carefully eked out. I didn't waste a drop of it, as it being very expensive, and succeeded. But we didn't glass the outside of that boat. And in fact, it needed doing. Another experience from that was using cheap Indonesian ply is not a good idea, though epoxy made it last a hell of a lot longer than it would have done without, because we had one spare sheet which stood just in the workshop, not in the wet, and it delaminated within a year. Whereas the boat lasted a good 10 years or more, I think, with the epoxy. And then, you know, due to little cracks and wear, delamination started to set in. So all interesting experience. We did more stitch and glue boats, we worked a lot with Douglas fir plywood, which I like very much. We built a 63-footer starting building in 1987. Took us 5 years to build here. And that was all built out of Douglas fir shuttering ply, as it was called, you know, builder's ply. And that's been excellent. I mean, this boat Angie has seen, still going strong after more than 30 years. And we use a lot of Douglas fir timber in there, all stringers and other solid wood. It's been good, clear Douglas fir, which I really love actually, and it's very rot proof actually, you know, from these 30 odd years experience on this boat, where rot sets in. In fact, rot happened mainly in hardwoods. We tried to use Western, you know, Northern European hardwoods, like we used we had some lovely chestnut actually, but there wasn't enough of it available. So we went over to some elm, and we used some ash as well. And that's where we had a lot of rot. It was all hatch combings, and I had to replace an awful lot of that 5-6 years ago. I did the main
But that wasn't
restoration
the
job.
ply. That was
Not the
just
plywood, no,
hardwood.
it was the combings, the hardwood combings up on top of the glass plywood actually. So whatever rot happened in those didn't travel into the boat structure itself at all. In some it traveled a little bit in the plywood top of the hatch where there was some serious rot, but I could again remove some of it, replace it. But that was the Douglas fir.
We're gonna circle back to that.
Yeah.
I'm flagging
so,
that as something to circle back to.
And of course, and then there's my whole design world alongside it. And through having built some, I think it's highly important as a designer to build boats and to sail them, because those are the two elements that makes you know what a boat should be like, and to make it easy to build. You can design complex, but it's not handy for the builders. It's complex. Now, the boat you're building, Angie and Remy, was designed before I was really involved. So the whole structure of that was designed by James, and it's simplicity, actually. What's interesting in your hull is, for instance, the whole backbone and bulkhead setup, a slot together thing, which sort of fixes your measurements so they don't go wrong, because it slots together. You've got your keel curve planned out all on the floor, and it can't change anymore because it's fixed into that backbone shape, which is helpful. And then the bulkhead slot on in precise locations. So it's very different from the normal setup on the built base, which all has to be very carefully leveled and measured out. And if you make mistakes there, they will carry in through the boat. Well, of course, if you make mistakes in your building too.
We're going to come back to that as well, and we'll have a good.
The other interesting thing is the bulkheads are not notched for the stringers in your case, because it's all glue. This does not rely on epoxy fillets. When you have epoxy fillets in bulkheads, you can just have plain plywood edges with notches into which you insert your stringers, and then the fillets take up all the funny angles and curves that are taken up with that. But because yours isn't notched, the stringers are actually just taken around. The bulkheads are made a little bit smaller to allow for the stringers thickness, and then the bits between stringers are actually packed out with more bits of wood, the same thickness as the stringer. And you can just work from the bottom upwards. You put your shear stringer on, get your little spaces, put the next stringer on top of those little spaces, next stringer on top, and you get a good flat gluing surface, and a quite broad one. So your bulkhead's gluing surface is actually increased from the normal framing to a wider piece which has been glued on. Anyway, I don't know whether you want me to go on and on like this. Maybe
we're going to come back to that, because
we can go back to more technicalities. But anyway, it's been 50 years of boat building and whatever experience I've learned from that. But it's all been largely, you could say, amateur-based boat building, purposely, because we try to build like our own builders, our self-builders do. So it's all very well having a really well kitted out workshop, but other people don't have it. So to rely on that would be not good for self-builders. They should be able to get on with basic hand DIY tools rather than big machinery, if possible.
Yeah, I like that. You put yourselves in the shoes of the self-builders who are going to build your designs. So you have to make use of the resources that.
I mean, they've evolved too. I mean, now you can get lovely sets of cordless tools, jigsaws, other saws, circular saws, and it's fantastic. You don't have to drag these electric cables around with you anymore. You can do it outdoors, and that's already. I mean, I was there when the jigsaw came out. It wasn't really there. I remember in the 60s, that first boat, my father had some attachment that he could fit on a drill that made it a jigsaw. I remember that. And actual jigsaws, they were just being invented.
Wow. It's
And the
wild.
other fantastic new tool, of course, is the oscillating saw. Incredibly good saw for boat repairs, so you can cut in funny corners. You can cut
That's the
bits out.
little one that they use
Yes,
to
the one
cut.
that does that, yeah. I
Yeah,
think
I
that one
love
was
that thing.
invented. It was invented for medical reasons,
Yeah, to
because
cut.
that
Yeah.
saw you can cut through bones without cutting through soft tissue. Because the
Mhm.
soft tissue,
Wow.
that's where the invention came from what I heard.
It's
Yeah.
so cool. Yeah, I used it so much, tearing Noka apart, and
Exactly.
you can put it on your hand and it'll vibrate on your hand, but doesn't cut your skin. And then you put it on the wood and it just cuts right through.
Yeah.
It's really fantastic.
Well, we had a case of termites, and I had to cut a whole panel out from behind some shelves, and I could cut the saw behind the shelf and the little fillets, keeping the fillets in place, and then I could just fit a panel at the back again and didn't need to remake the epoxy fillets or anything. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Hanneke. You're our grand matriarch of the council. And we've got so many questions to come back to for you. Obi and Otto, I don't know if you want to go like as a duo, or, you know, a bit of background on each of you and then what you're doing together as a duo, but take it away.
Okay, so we've got quite a bit of background noise, so we're trying to keep this quite short and sweet.
Okay.
We're holding up basically Wharram. We are about 5 minutes away from a unit where we're picking up a 1938 26-foot enclosed cruiser for a restoration project. So the day has been a bit mental. We started at 4 o'clock this morning, and it's been a 5-hour drive to get down here. We're now holding up in Starbucks.
This is our little breakfast break.
A little breakfast break before we crack on and take a trailer back to Fishcraft back to Line Regis. So yeah, it's been an interesting day already.
Thank you so much for carving out the time, though. Really.
No, absolutely no problem at all. No problem at all. So very quickly, my background. Fairly new to boat building, I'm not going to lie. Did the course at the Boat Building Academy in 2021, 2022. Prior to that, I did 28 years in marketing as a creative design agency, run my own agency, offices in different parts of the world. Super cool. Sold the business and decided to go and career change. And my wife Louise said, "Why didn't you go and build boats?" So I went on the course, and that's where I met Obi. And after the Boat Building Academy, we set up Blue Tree as a business, which has been going nearly 2 years. And it's all based around sustainability and being progressive and challenging the norm of what's possible, whether that's materials, whether that's boat design, where we land some of our own day launches, and looking at electric. So that's generally me. Okay.
So I'm Obi, and I worked in design for boat building. So I think it's you're kind of trying to think of how to build better, and function in mind and beauty in mind. And then so I'm here with my beauty hat on, but also with my boat building, obviously trying to get more hands-on. That's me.
I'm gonna do a proper interview with you soon anyway, Obi. It's a little hard to hear you guys at the moment, but I'm gonna leave links to, there's some articles already about you, and I'll leave links to what you're doing at Blue Tree, because it's really, really, really amazing. And we actually met at the Fiberglass Symposium at the University of Brighton. So I know that we're aligned in the knowledge exchange of, you know, this overarching kind of exploration of how boat building can be more regenerative. So really, really stoked to have you guys here. And the wonderful Kiana, who is coming from a different kind of boat building background in completely tearing her 50-year-old Wharram Marinoka apart and rebuilding it. So you can introduce yourself, Kiana, and whatever approach you want, go for it.
Thanks. Yeah, that. But before that came my experience with Hans Klaar and his boat Ontong Java. And yeah, just seeing all this simplicity. That was where I got my introduction to Wharrams, was learning about his past and him living on a Wharram for over a decade, and then going on to build Ontong Javas. And I got to have the experience of helping him change the top deck, not the top deck rather, but the actual deck of Ontong Java. So taking off the top deck and removing the plywood deck and then replacing it. But he did it with no power tools, hand saw. And so it was very in-depth and just up close, hands-on experience that I got to have. And this was in September, October of 2020. And by December, I was in Florida with Maranoka. In February, I pulled Maranoka out of the water. Prior to that, I just didn't understand what I could do or how to do it or what needed to be done to the boat, even though it obviously needed a lot of work. I just had no clue where to even start. So at least with Hans and having the experience of changing Ontong Java's deck, I got to learn how to use a handsaw and epoxy. And so I got those two concepts at least to start with, and then everything else came from taking Maranoka apart, and it was coated in resorcinol glue and nylon sheathing and tar, and I didn't even know what that was at the time. So it took me months to figure out. And I know, Hanneke, I wrote to you and I was like, what is this?
Actually, that's what we had on our tahini. We had resorcinol glue, nylon, and epoxy tar on the outside. It was very good and relatively cheap.
Very good. And I wish I had really figured it out and it registered in my brain to what it was before I peeled the boat and then I glassed it with fiberglass, very thin layer, 7-ounce cloth and epoxy. But I could have, in hindsight, just painted it with epoxy tar again and left everything as it was.
Yeah, the nylon, if it was still adhering well, you could have kept it.
Yeah,
it was adhering very well. So yeah, I learned a lot in that process, and but it's a completely different experience, I think, rebuilding, backwards, doing it backwards, taking it apart and trying to fit. I had to rebuild a bulkhead, and that was probably the most difficult for me, was trying to figure out how I'm going to fit this bulkhead inside of a hull that's already made instead of building the hull around the bulkhead. But it worked out fine. It took a while. And yeah, so it's just my experience is very, very backwards from building. But during that time, I realized how much I enjoyed that. Just the hands-on, seeing the change in a boat and how much I really do want to build a boat from scratch also one day. So I've got some ideas.
That's why you're coming here to help us.
Yeah.
And it's really Kiana's fault that we're building one. But I want to give a bit of transparency around how we came to build the Wharrams. So I started working on Kiana's movie, the Women in the Wind documentary, which documents herself and 2 other females crossing the North Atlantic on Maranoka following the refit. Kiana had been a solo sailor already crossing on Maranoka as the boat was before that refit, which is remarkable. And I started working as a producer on the film in post-production. And I just remember watching the first rough cut of the film with Remy and Ryder, my eldest. And because we'd had this project concept for years to do this floating stories lab, to create a research and storytelling sailboat studio. And we wanted to you know, be on a boat that was maybe a little less damaging, you know, not a mass-produced plastic fantastic GRP boat. We were looking into steel and aluminium. They were way out of our budget, even for secondhand. And we watched this movie, and for me, it was instant. It was like, wow, Wharram, you know, I'm double screening, Googling Wharram. I'm just became obsessed really quickly. And at first Remy was like, you're out of your mind, because of, you know, they got 3 big storm systems during this movie, and I don't want to give the movie away, but there was a lot of water inside and outside of the boat.
That was a year
I
ago.
remember
That was a year
Yeah.
ago.
I was still an
Angie
engineer with
texting
Boon
me.
company, you know. Now I'm modeling the Wharram, like, and the dream comes true. So,
So yeah,
Kiana, you change a lot of things, you know.
yeah, but I bought the book. I started learning all about the philosophy, and because my work in filmmaking, in film storytelling, documentary making, had been a lot in climate security and community conservation from the perspective of indigenous communities. The whole philosophy of Wharram in being like kind of a modern evolution of Polynesian voyaging canoes really, really centered and aligned with me. So then Kiana introduced us to Hanneke, and we were invited to go and spend a few days on Spirit of Gaia. And that's where it just all started to blossom out. And I had been looking at what design we should build. And honestly, like, I want to say something super intelligent here as to how we came to land on the Narai Mark IV. But everyone that I was researching on all the forums seemed to be building tikis, and probably for a good reason, but I didn't want to build what everyone else was building. So I was like, hey, the Narai Mark, I want to build a classic. And I guess having that relationship with Kiana, and, you know, I've watched this movie so many times now, so I feel like I know Maranoka a little bit, and her boat seemed really aligned with the way that we already have lived in the past as a semi-nomadic family. Although I had a moment after we were on Gaia when I came home and I was like, oh, I want to build a pahi. And I think I text Hanneke, should we change? But anyway, I think that's probably a good place to start now. The next phase of this conversation is our boat is going to be the Narai Mark IV. Kiana's is the Narai 1. So it's a little bit of an evolution. And perhaps as we show a bit of the model and talk about why we're building a model, Kiana and Hanneke, maybe you can chime in as to, you know, some of the, Hanneke, maybe some of the evolutions from the Narai 1 to the Narai 4.
Yeah, I
And
can point those out, yes.
yeah, and Obi and Otto, if you have any questions, even if you, maybe you can pop them in the chat and we can, yeah. But so originally, because Remy comes from an engineering background, he started putting the plans into CAD to kind of anticipate the build. And Hanneke and I got talking, and oh, he should really build a model. Anyway, it took a bit of arm twisting, and we ended up deciding to build a model, which for many reasons is a great idea. And I would like to know, you know, Otto and Obi, I think you use a bit of CAD, but I'm really curious of how other boat builders are in that research and design process. Obviously, Wharrams, you already have the plans. We're amateurs, so we're sticking to the plans, but it's a really incredible process of anticipating what's coming, making mistakes that are way more affordable. But from our perspective as a family, I think when Remy was doing the CAD, we couldn't be involved. That was him on the computer, us looking over the shoulder. That gets a little bit boring. You know, the kids aren't interested, but having a physical, tangible model, you're using Autodesk Fusion. Is that CAD? That's a, CAD program, right? So this tangible model has meant all the kids, even the baby, has been involved. Remy's definitely, you know, the most involved on it, but I've even been able to get in there, and it's given me confidence to know that I'm going to be able to get involved in the actual boatyard as well.
So it's not like, you know.
So Hanneke, you were talking before, I think, about something that struck me about the notches with the bulkheads.
Fingers,
And
yes.
So
if I look closely,
I haven't
you haven't put any of this, the fill-in
yet.
bits in between yet. No. Yeah, there's two ways you can do it, before or after. In reality, when you come to building your real boat,
You do
I
it
think
at the same time.
it's a lot easier to do them each stringer at a time. You know, start at the bottom, put the first stringer in, put your little pieces in, next stringer on top, etc. Because then you get tight joints without having to carefully measure them. Okay?
Yeah.
And if a stringer ends up a millimeter or two higher or lower, it's not necessarily the end of the world. Okay? But yeah. So
right,
yeah, you
Otto's
mark
just
where your
saying that
stringer's
Obi
got to go,
also
and then
modeled
cut
the
'em.
Artist 8.
Yeah.
That
So
it's
that-
really
that-
helpful.
And of course, I presume you beveled the edges of your bulkhead slightly to take account of the curvature of the
Beveled?
hull.
Beveled them.
Yeah. Which is
Yeah,
the
because you can do that just with a plane in you know, a few
Yeah.
strokes,
did.
and you've got it. Whereas if you cut notches, each notch got to be cut at that bevel angle, which makes it very complicated.
But on the plan, I went from the midsection because
Yeah.
that's where like there's the dimension
Yes.
for the stringers.
Yeah.
And instead of like reproduce what you say before, I just make the wood bend naturally, so
Yes.
I could have a natural curve towards the bow and the stern.
Yes.
That's why I haven't set up the middle pieces between the stringer yet.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if on the real build I should, as you said, like as I go with the stringer, set those which you call them.
Well, I would temporarily screw the stringer on so you're happy with its position. But before you glue it, cut all your bits
Okay.
and then,
Yeah.
and then put it in. I think that would be easiest, you know, and then move upwards. Of course, the stringers that are going to carry furniture, you want to get horizontal.
There's
And
only
only-
one in the plan that say the fourth
the one with the
stringer.
bunk. Yeah, the bunks and any floors, and of course worktops in the center part. You want to get those straight and horizontal.
Okay.
And then where the rest goes is not so important. You may want to bevel off the edges of the bulk of the stringers beforehand where furniture goes on. You know, because the V hull, you see this? You know, you want to bevel off the top of the stringer where your furniture is going to fit on. So that's where the model is really good, because you can plan it ahead and you know what you want to do and stuff. Whereas if you just put it all together and then after saying, oh, I should have beveled that off, you know, then it's a bugger.
It's way cheaper to make mistakes on this, and
Yeah.
we have made
So-
some mistakes.
Yeah, well, exactly. So there's all sorts of things you can make
But
mistakes
that's why
on.
modeling with was really good. Actually, it was a really good tips. Of course, you push that for a reason. And as we go, like for me personally, is like now the sets of plan are really come naturally as I reread them. You know, from the beginning to where I am now, like everything seems to be so natural and it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not there yet for the inside adjustment of the boat, so not everything makes sense about like the bevel of the stringer, etc.
Yeah.
But as I'm gonna build the second hull and make them as a real boat, it will make more sense again.
Now, once you have, in reality, there's this sort of skeleton with all the stringers on, you could already mark out your various floors and things before you put the ply planking on, because you can put your ply, slide it in between the stringers, hold it in place, mark on the bottom, cut it out, have it ready
that's not a
for
bad
fitting
idea.
later. Because to inside a hole to try and measure exactly the size of a floor, you know, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, but that's the refit job that you've been doing, where you've got to fit it into an existing space. You've got to carefully measure or make little patterns of cardboard or whatever to try and make certain it fits well. Of course, epoxy is a wonderful material, and if you cut something a little bit short, or you don't necessarily have to cut your plywood at a beveled angle, you cut them square, glue them in, make fillets in those little triangular gaps that are left around the edges.
Yeah.
In fact, fillets are fantastic because they and always make certain they smooth after you're finished, particularly in bilges and that. Because if they're not smooth, it's collection of dirt in the future. You know, you've got to be able to wipe things clean, easy. So the smoother and cleaner your bilges and your floors and your corners are, the easier it is to keep clean.
Yeah.
And damp dirt in corners causes rot. So you don't
Yeah,
want
that's good advice.
So rot come from the inside of the boat or the outside, Hanneke, or
Well,
like even Otto and
well, it depends. Rot can come from inside if there's water left in or other stuff. Generally, rot comes where rainwater.
because there's an advisor here in France, like Pascal Petit, that you met at Lorient, Hanneke. He said that often, I don't have the word in English, but you know the condensation? He said
Condensation
the
is-
water
Condensation
condensation
can cause rot. Yes, actually, that's one thing. The undersides of all your floors and bunks,
need to be.
particularly over bilges that might be a bit damp or have a bit of water in them. What happens, water in a bilge will evaporate and then condense on the underside of the floor. And if that's not coated properly, it will get all mildewy and eventually rot.
Because he said
So-
condensation, the particle are smaller than the actual water. So he penetrate the wood quite.
No, it just gets wet. You put your hand in there and you feel wet hanging off the ceiling.
Yeah.
And, it just actually gets wet.
Okay.
On the downward facing surfaces. Actually, another example on Gaia, we actually got a small hole in the side of the boat caused in the marina underwater. We think it was probably a semi-submerged floating chunk of wood, and in strong winds when the whole water starts sloshing around there, and between the holes on the inside, it bumped into the plywood and cracked it. Didn't go through, but it cracked it enough that water could get through in.
Wow.
And put about a good bucket or more of water in the bilge. And then the plywood swelled with having got wet and it stopped leaking. And this was under my storage of tools in an area where actually there was the speedometer was fitted there, but the speedometer had stopped working. So I hadn't looked in that bilge for a year at least. And it's a V bilge with a backbone in the middle. Okay.
Yep.
And the hole was on one side. Eventually, I opened the whole thing because the speedometer wasn't working. I was going to replace it and open the floorboards, and there's all this water on both sides of the backbone, which was interesting. And more on the one with the hole, but there was water on the other side. So either it had been there a good year and sloshed over the top as we were sailing, or with condensation that came up and then dropped down again the other side. But probably we had been sailing with that water in the bilge and with waves and that it sloshed over the top. But being all sealed with epoxy in there, I bailed it all out, mopped it all dry, cut out, what did I do? Yeah, I cut out the splintered bits of wood. And with the hole and the hole of the speedometer, I let the nice dry Greek air blow through it for a while. And it all dried out beautifully within a week, and then sealed it all up again, ply patch over the hole, filler on the outside, all done.
And
So
which plywood did you use, Hanneke,
that
for
was
the
Douglas fir plywood. That was Douglas fir plywood.
That's a good segue now into
Yeah, the
material.
Douglas fir plywood doesn't seem to rot that easy, and nor did the wet seem to spread over a particularly large area. It had obviously, I sanded off the surface to see how far the wet was into the wood. You have to sand away the epoxy coating to let it dry, where it's absorbed into the plywood, and then just reglass it and seal it and all the rest.
Okay, that's a good segue into the materials discussion, which I want to start with this quote I read in like an 80s edition of Wooden Boat magazine, which I can share the link to. It's hard enough to be objective about boats. Perhaps it's impossible, but it's most difficult to be objective about boat building materials. And amen to that. Over the last 6 months, as you guys know, I've been diving into boat building materials, and very interesting coming from a place of not being a boat builder. So obviously, the Wharram is a ply epoxy build with some sheathing, like Kiana's was the nylon sheathing, and these days a lot of people are using a thin layer of glass on the outside. So the long story short, because we've been sharing all our research publicly, so I don't really need to go in and rehash all of that. But we have to make a decision now. And we are going to try and stick to the Wharram philosophy of keeping things low cost and using what's as locally available as possible, whilst, you know, minimizing destruction on the planet. That's the general idea. Let's start with plywood.
But also to add, like what Angie, like she's been doing a lot of research on material, and we were overwhelmed about a lot of possibility and solution and what you can combine. And after we came with like the one question that helped us to find a direction was like epoxy or not.
True.
And when we were like, okay, are we going to use epoxy? And we said, yes, we need to use epoxy. Then naturally we were like, oh, but then maybe we can use like a less premium plywood, because we're going to add some epoxy and fiberglass, you know,
Yeah,
on
that's
top of
that's
it.
a
Right,
really
that's
good
the whole point of it. That's the idea
Absolutely.
that you can do that.
We decided we are going to use epoxy, so tick that box, and we can get into the epoxies we're looking at. So we sat down with Pascal here, who's a boat builder with a lot of experience with Wharrams, not anywhere near as much experience as Hanneke, but he's a big Wharram fan, and he's built boats since he was 5 years old, all wooden. So he's been a great, like, hands-on local person for us to pick his brain, and with existing relationships to suppliers. We're leaning towards Bati pine because it's grown here in France.
So Bati pine is the name, it's maritime pine.
Maritime pine. Bati pine is the name of the brand then, is it? Yeah.
And
And
it's plywood made of that, is it?
yeah,
Great.
maritime pine. And it's the WBP, is that the correct terminology? Water boil proof. They have the three kind of grades, like, you know, the third grade would be with the more knots, and the first grade and second grade. is
So
less.
one side good, two sides good. Or
Yeah, we
no
want to
sides
use
good.
1 and 2, and apparently at the moment there might only be 2 and 3 available, so we have to either check for other suppliers. But the cool thing with this particular wood is that the forest, the managed forestry for it, is where we used to live, and we just spent 5 years living in Lelan in Ont, and I walked those forests every single day with the dog.
That's really nice.
For 5 years. So I feel like that's a connection that feels local, that feels sustainable, which is also objective, but
And it's also the most affordable, actually.
and it's affordable.
And
So
so how much does a sheet of that plywood cost?
So like
Roughly.
the really low grade, which I don't want to use, it's really cheap. It's 14 euro a meter square.
and the next grade?
And so it's super cheap. I was talking with Pascal here, and he was like, wow, that's really cheap. And I find a next grade up, which they call it the Elite, and it's 28 euro the meter square.
28 euros square. So a sheet of plywood, which is
It's
3 meters?
2
3
point,
square meters.
yeah,
Yeah, so 3 times, so 70, well, just over
it will
70
be
euros
it will
a
be
sheet,
70 euro the
which
sheet.
I think by modern standard, and that's how thick?
That's my next question, because in the thickness there's also an element of in French nombre de plis. I think number of
Ply, yeah.
ply.
Oh, yes.
And that's what I want to ask you guys.
Would be
Especially
best if you could have 5, if possible,
Okay.
on yours. What thickness plywood? 10 millimeter or so?
I have 10. Like right now, the quotation that I have been asked and received is for 10 millimeter and minimum of ply 5, but I will prefer 7.
Yeah.
Well,
Also,
I don't
I
know,
would
with
say-
this pine, I think 5 is enough.
Yeah.
Because
it's
they
more
say pine
difficult
is
to cut
stronger
thin
than-
veneers, you see. Out of pine, it's usually Douglas fir 10 millimeter would never be more than 5 laminations. In fact, we used 11 millimeter on Gaia, and our first plywood was all 5, and then actually, strangely enough, a later batch we bought was only 4, which is a bit strange. So the 2 inner ones are going one direction, 2 outer ones the opposite, but that's been fine. And
Do you know
it's
what
all
the
been
deal is?
11 millimeters, strangely enough. So if you have 10 millimeter and 5 laminations,
Right.
you should be quite happy with that. On the other hand, we did build professionally a number of boats here,
And knowledge.
which is, of course, Lulut, Benji's boat is built. That was Baltic pine plywood that came from
How do I do a question?
Baltic
mark?
countries anyway, or Poland or somewhere. And it looks a bit like your Vendia plywood. And that came in thinner laminations. I think we got, five laminations in 6 mil ply and things like that. Quite thin, beautiful plywood, but it's not been available anymore. And maybe your ply. I would love to see some samples if you could send any bits in.
We're
the
trying
post.
to get some.
Yeah,
aren't
we. I'm in conversation with them because, so like we said, they're not exactly made for marine plywood,
No.
the maritime pine, and so they're more designed towards like the industry of
Goodness.
building construction of the outside one.
Exterior.
And there's
yeah.
a bit of a crisis at the moment, especially in France with
Shortage, right?
yeah, it's not shortage, but there's not a lot of new project get built because of
Okay.
some recession, and
Yeah.
therefore the supply chain is really affected. So I'm in conversation, and I'm supposed to call him again today, so I
Yeah.
could have.
But you will have
better-
a big order all in one go, hopefully. Yeah, I would order all your plywood if possible in one go.
But they're
And
going to
you're-
impose me a minimum order quantity anyway.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
that's almost match our requirement, which is
Oh, your
100
requirement.
ply.
Yeah, have a bit extra, I think, for mistakes or
Yeah.
or badly laid out. If you don't
Well,
use it,
that's what I use
economical,
CAD actually, Annika.
That's where you can use CAD for that. In fact, actually, a lot of the later designs have got all these ply layouts worked out for you. I'm afraid the Narai hasn't got that yet.
He's
so-
been working.
But if you're doing that, actually, Remy, I would love that in return, and then we can add it to the plans if you
Yeah.
do a nice.
So I was starting to do it like manually like that. So
Yes.
I made those ply, but it's so work consuming, and like it's just with the
Please do
it's
it
not
on CAD.
efficient. So I just did that on CAD now. So I
Well, you can
basically
always
have
make
like
little paper patterns and lay them on your plywood sheets. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I've done, and then essentially that's the optimized way, and I could fit on the on the drawing that
Yeah.
we bought. There's 8 for the bulkhead. There's 8 sheet. And
Yeah.
with the rearrangement, I could fit everything on 6 sheet of plywood. So
There
I
you
was
go.
pretty proud.
Oh, there you're very proud. Yeah. Well, I did a lot of that manually without a computer. So like Tiki 36, Tiki 4, they've all got these layouts for them. I can send you some just so you get a bit of an idea of how it's done. Nice thing is if you can use your plywood as you go along. I mean, to put some bulkheads in on a bit of a hatch on one sheet, all very nice, but you're not going to be making that hatch until a year later, and by that time your piece of plywood is either you have to label it all. So it's always good to do your layouts, in the same sequence as the building. If you can do that, you're working on all your bulkheads together. I will send you some of other designs to give you some idea. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we can do an exchange. I'll give you more information, and I will have your information back, and then we'll be helping future builders.
That's
It's all-
knowledge
Yeah,
exchange.
but I'm also creating like I capitalize all the information and I centralize it. So I will send you all the screenshot that I have and on the CAD
Yeah.
part, so you can
Yeah.
have that. So I can the information for the plywood. We said maritime pine, okay, because we use epoxy, 10 millimeters and 5 ply.
5 laminations, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that all sounds good. I mean, the plywood we used for Gaia was not considered marine ply at all. In fact, it was builder's plywood, and they would use it for concrete shuttering.
Oh wow.
And and there was only one side good, and even you see, Douglas fir plywood's gone through a whole evolution. When Tahini was built in the late 60s, plywood came from America or Canada, and Douglas fir plywood was absolutely beautiful. And you could buy 2 sides good, and it was made good. Any knots in the surface lamination, they punched them out in a sort of eye-shaped punch and put a little glued an actual new bit of plywood veneer in there. So you had these little sort of shaped little patches in on both sides. So it was beautiful. I still got some of old tahini bunk boards in my workshop.
Kiana, do you know what plywood was used on Maranoka? Because it was definitely high quality.
Yeah,
Was
I'm
that-
not positive. I'll go ahead, Hanneke.
Was it you would know if it was a softwood Douglas fir plywood or not.
I think it was mahogany.
Yeah, so
I think
it's
it
some
was
sort of browny
mahogany.
color.
Yeah, it has it's a darker color, has 7 layers, and the glue is very, very, very dark. So I think it's resourceful
No, that's
glue.
good. That was probably a marine plywood of a mahogany type. And if it's dark, the darker the mahogany, the better the hardwood. Because nowadays you get this kumi plywood, which is quite pinky in color. It's a lighter color, which is
There's one.
generally the-
Sorry, one
most
supplier
people use that.
recommends sapeli from Africa, but
We would prefer
we
not
try to avoid. But
we're
he
trying
said
Sapili is quite a heavy wood, actually. Sapili. I mean,
It's
I've got
also
door
really
frames
expensive.
and window frames made of sapili here in the house, but it's quite dense and hard. And I think Douglas fir plywood's much nicer. I would definitely go for that. As you can get it, which is amazing.
Yeah.
You can get it, go for it. But
When I went
the thing with Douglas fir is it must, on the outside, you must put a layer of some sort of sheathing on it everywhere. Because if you don't, it will form little surface cracks, even painted after time. It will start to just form little, with the heat and expansion, it will also form little surface cracks. But as you can see on Gaia, there's been none of that. Okay.
So with the timber, because you red flagged.
Yeah.
Pascal had recommended Friend, which is ash, and then you just told a horror story earlier about ash. So and Obi's shaking her head now. Don't use ash.
I don't know.
So
Ash, who's
I don't
shaking
know what
their
to do.
head? Obi. Yeah. Well, ash. First of all, they used to. It's quite a resilient wood, and I think when they made coracles and things, they would split ash. You could do a lot with split ash. It would split, and you could bend it well and everything. Cleats often were made of ash.
It's not durable.
But ash tends to mildew easy. You get black spots. Gets really ugly looking outside. We made our toe rails originally from ash, and we oiled them, and they ended up black and horrible. And after, when did we? Well, I think it was after about 10 years or so, after we'd sailed around the world, we took them all off and replaced them with Sirocco because they were just horrible. And the grain started to groove. I think the softer bits of the grain sort of got worn away, and the harder bits formed ridges, and they were black, and they were.
How was
ugly.
chestnut, Hanneke?
Yeah, my problem is with the hatches. I'm not quite sure which bits were chestnut and which were elm and which were the ash. I can usually is more yellowy, but the elm and the chestnut actually look quite similar. Actually, it's a beautiful wood to carve. I really like it. It's quite light, it's beautiful. But for stringers and keel planks and that, I think you're better off with some form of Douglas fir, actually.
Mine, I have some form of pine rather, or something that smells very, very, very good for all my stringers. Every time you cut
it can
into
be a different pine. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
a Douglas fir pine necessarily, but it wants to be fairly clear of knots if you can get it. Yeah.
It's very oily also, my stringers. They're very I don't know if oily is the right term, but
Well, sort of a bit resiny, probably.
yeah.
I mean, there's things like pitch pine, which have got they're darker and lighter streaks, very hard and dense. But you don't find pitch pine much anymore. But as it say, pitch, I think that's very resiny. I don't know how good that is with epoxy in the long run.
And for chestnuts, I had the question from Obi, like chestnut. I was talking with a guy in the yard, and he said that chestnut are really high concentration of tannin,
Tannins.
Yeah.
Tannins.
Tannin.
Yeah, and he said that sometimes that can cause like it can faster the not the rotting, but you know when a screw get oxidized.
Yeah, so it rots your fastenings.
Yeah, so
Right.
he said he will not recommend a chestnut where there's screw because of that
When you
high.
use screws. Yeah. So if you don't use fastenings, if you go for the steel screws and remove them all, you wouldn't have that problem.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea anyway. I'd like to remove fastenings if possible.
Yeah, we've been debating about that.
You have to fill the little holes after, but on the other hand, the epoxy glue is strong enough. Only in places where really, on the other hand, the places where you chain plate areas and that, where you do want some fastenings through,
Kiana's coming back
you
again.
may have to be. I mean, you can certainly use chestnut on interior woodwork, framing of bulkheads and other things.
But what I want to try is like go
Kiana's with
to.
us twice now.
There's
We have
two
two
I
Kianas.
can remove the pause, Kiana. Oh no, that's
Yeah.
a live Kiana. Good.
And-
Otto and Obi, you guys are using Vendia or are you using a mix? Vendia for some things, and what else are you using? Typing. It's coming. It's not instant.
And Hanneke, as they type for the wood, I want to order only one essence of wood so I can have better deal, because I find that so far when I go and talk with the supplier, when I say, oh, for the keel, I would like that essence, that meter, and for the other one, I don't fit the minimum or the quantity.
Yeah.
So my goal will go from one essence of wood that can be used for all the structure, the hard structure of the board. That will be my optimal.
I think you want to go for some pine species for
Okay.
for the main structure of the boat, all the keel planking, the stringers, the framing of bulkheads, deck stringers, all that stuff. The only place where hardwood would come in well is when you do hatches and conings and tow rails and whatever else. And
From a
My
sourcing point of view, that's going to make more sense. Sorry, Kiana.
I was just gonna say, my stems, the layered planks,
Yeah,
very thick
yeah.
stems. I'm not sure what kind of wood they are, but they seem like not the hardest wood, and not the same as the stringers inside because they don't smell the same.
Yeah, you could have the out. Yeah, and the outer keel plank have a harder wood maybe, but
Yeah,
the
and
other
they're
hand,
quite light colored. They're quite white, the wood.
white.
Yeah, I'll
But
have
you
to
think
send
it's
you
a
some photos.
hardwood? You think it's a hardwood?
I'm not. If it is, it's not that hard.
No.
Yeah.
Well, but they were designed to be made out of Douglas fir or something like that.
Yeah, I think it might be Douglas fir. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Douglas fir is usually a bit on the pink side, more pinky. Whereas some other pines may be more yellowy. There's yellow pine. And then there is, Douglas fir more pinky. And usually you can see the grain on Douglas fir. There's different shades of stripy pink.
Okay. I'll have to look at some photos.
Otto has just said we started with Vendia, but always researching others. Plywood ongoing. Love the idea of a UK source plywood. Also for centerline, thinking of heat treated woods in North Devon, very close to us. Yeah, you have the same philosophy of us as trying to keep things local as possible, which makes sense for sustainability and economical reasons. We've shared and we support Vendia a lot. It's not really in our price point, and that's a factor. We're sticking with our reality and also the Wharram philosophy, which is low cost. And of course, we're in France and they're in Finland, but it's great that you're using it, and I know that Hekke's building a canoe out of it at the moment as well, and we we have a really good relationship with Vendia. That might change in the future. We might have the opportunity to use some of it, but for now, yeah, we really want to look at sticking with a French grown and produced wood. And it's super cool. Like I said, that we used to walk these forests where they were growing them.
Well,
So
I think that's really nice. I like that idea very much. And of course, I do love the sort of pine plywoods. You know, they've been my favorite plywoods all along, actually. And we've built most boats out of that when possible.
Remy, you ask.
Yeah.
Don't
No,
take.
it was. I'm not sure if you can answer that question, but how much is the meter square of plywood at Vendia? Do you have like a?
The cost. I don't know, actually. Did I get given some cost? It was triple. It was
Otto and
about
Obi.
3 times as much as Robin's Elite plywood or something. I can't remember. But I don't know. It was expensive.
Yeah, it's. I mean, their
You may
business
know
model
that,
is.
Otto.
Their business model is really centered on sustainability, and obviously they're a small startup. But so moving forward, we obviously, I think it's clear now that sticking to a pine species grown here in France is going to be the right move forward, and then maybe looking at some hardwood for the hatches. Epoxy. Obviously, when we originally talked, we had hoped we would have a little guest from Australia who is making a really cool, 100% bio-epoxy product. I've written about that. I don't need to dive too much into it. We circle back to the same thing, like, is it really the right decision to get a product that's being made in Australia shipped all the way across the world?
I totally agree with your thinking, actually, on that. And I think epoxies are toxic to a certain extent, and I don't think we can avoid that.
There's also been no testing, and this is something where part of our Regenerative Tides initiative with Dr. Karina at the University of Brighton, no one's actually tested bio-epoxies on mussels and oysters and marine ecosystems yet. So just because they're bio how will these creatures and the ecosystem react? We're looking at trying to do that kind of testing down the future. Someone brought it up in the Wharram group, which I found really cool. It was like, investing in bio products might make us feel good, but what actually is the impact on the environment? And I love that line of thinking, because it makes us sort of think outside the box a little bit more. What we're looking at now is using Cyclamen. Cyclamen,
They're a French company, right?
They're a French company here in Brittany, which is even better.
And
they're 40 minutes from us.
40 minutes from us, and the product is the SR5550, and then they have different runners. I'm going to share the actual technical data sheet, and I shared with you, Hanneke, like a little analysis that I did on it the other day.
Price-wise, compare with, say, buying West epoxy in France?
We don't know yet.
Price seems to be something that
French people don't like to share price. No, there's a little bit in the Wharram Builders group. There's a little bit of very truthful frustration over French distributors and communications. Even though we have a French person in the room, but we're working on the price. But Pascal has used Cyclamen. Our friends at Euroglass Surfboards, they use one of the part bio Cyclamen products. It's a lower viscosity. There's a whole technical data sheet.
I do have the West price list if you want to. I've got
the
price
comparison.
It gives you the retail prices as well as their trade prices and things. Of course, we've been lucky as a firm. We've been getting lower trade prices, which is good.
Yeah, that would be great. Kiana's coming in again.
But the thing is, Wessex, who produce that here in England, which is what we get, if it goes overseas, it's got the prices go up, and people have to buy it through their local distributors.
Yes.
They won't sell direct from England to you anyway. So
no,
it's the prices you have to find from
I've been
Oh,
told
well,
that the
it's-
new distributor of West in France is much better than the old one, who I heard was really terrible to work with. So
Yeah,
I did
okay,
have a
yeah.
nice chat with the West team.
No.
So yeah, we're leaning towards Sycamore, but obviously we need to.
But I think, I mean, it's good to try different ones actually. I mean, West has got some downsides. It does tend to form this bloom quite easy if it's a bit damp atmosphere, which you don't have to clean off, which is not great. There are others that do that less and maybe better, and maybe slightly less toxic in their hardness. I don't know.
Hanneke, Otto has a question. Are there any examples of heat treated in Wharrams? Difficulty with workability?
What do you mean by heat treated? Sorry,
Woods.
I'll see if I can see the message.
The wood, I presume? The hardwoods.
Let's have a look there. Are there any examples of heat treated? What do you mean by heat treated? You mean dried in?
Yeah, because in France, as the guy he said that they chop the wood and either it dry naturally or either they
Remy's just saying in France they have the
It's
option of.
dried in a kind of oven, isn't it? I think a lot of wood is nowadays dried
nowadays it's all yeah.
artificially, rather than naturally seasoned outdoors. I don't know. Yeah, it is important that wood is seasoned, but I think I haven't really got an answer to that.
Yeah, Kiana, you had an issue with was it your boom when you went back to Brazil because it had just been cut down and then hadn't dried and it snap on your thing?
Yeah.
Wood does
but that
need
was,
to
I mean, very, very, yeah, it didn't season it. I mean, we had the boom that we crossed for the film. Also, we had chopped it down in the forest and 2 days later it was sailing, but that was some kind of maple and it had a lot of water in it still, but it lasted and it was much harder than what I usually have. And that's here now is it's called Japanese cedar, Cryptomeria. Very, very nice wood for spars because it's so light. The entire boom, I could pick it up and balance it on one hand, which is just incredible. But if it's not cured, it snaps.
Yeah, I've seen planks of it that they were using,
Yeah.
you know, on Ontong Java and the other Pi 42. I got a piece of it. They had it there in Portugal, and they're selling it in Portugal and in the Azores, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's like I think it was like 15 euros per plank for some pretty long planks. I don't remember how much, so pretty affordable. And I mean, they're very thick planks. I have some here. I just haven't been able to use them because the planks that I have on the deck are much thinner than those. But I really enjoy it. I like the wood a lot. It lasts for the affordability and for the weight of it, which makes a big difference. You know, if it's going to last you 5 years, I think it makes sense.
Yeah. Have you had any? Are your decks made of that? Your platform decks, are they made of that?
No, they're half. Well, not half, but I have some old deck that is some spiny cedar from Panama that Hans cut down in the forest as well. They were put on green, and they've been curing on the boat, and they're really, really nice because they're still here. Very nice. But I changed most of the deck when I was in Florida. Because those planks had cured on the boat, there were just some very large gaps and they were all warped. So I changed it to this untreated pine planks, which are terrible. Don't do that. So now it's 3 years later. And I mean, they're okay. They're here. You're not going to fall through them, but they're cracked and warped and not ideal. But the cedar is really nice.
Yeah. Some advice on your platforms, a cheap solution, which we did on Tahini, is you buy this pressure treated wood, you know, the slightly greeny stuff they use for building work, and make your platforms of that. You don't glue them, just bolt them together. And I've at least still got a piece of Tahini platform that's been around for ages, built like that, and it's still going all right. So it's a nice cheap solution. Well, nothing's cheap now, but it was a lot
Yeah.
cheaper than nicer wood. And that seems durable, you know, and it looks quite nice actually. You can even get it without it being planed that smooth. Yeah, but what we did, we bought it unplaned and we kind of roughly sanded it. So you got some texture and it's less slippery.
I will chat about planing. Pascal has encouraged us, and I think we've decided we'll present it to the group and see what you all think, that we invest, you know, about 1,500 euros in getting a planer and then plane the timber ourselves, because the timber yards tend to charge a lot for that. And I guess it comes down to the time balance ratio. We can obviously sell the planer afterwards, because, you know, we're not going to be continuing to build boats, or maybe down the track, but not here.
Might be worthwhile. It might be
I'll
worthwhile
borrow
doing
it.
that.
There you go. Maybe we can keep it in the women and the
I would quite
women.
like to have a planer too, actually, sometimes. Yeah.
So yeah, we're thinking about planing ourselves. I actually want to talk about, because we were talking about boom, I want to talk about masts and
Cross beams.
yeah, just for the masts as well, and like we haven't decided on the rigging yet, if we're going to do the wing sail rig or do like a ketch setup. But you know, Pascal was, and this comes back to using what's locally available. He can probably source us a mast or maybe two of aluminium. And so we were thinking about that, whereas originally, you know, I had wanted to use wood, but that might be the way we're going. And he is encouraging us on a catch rig, Hanneke. This is where, like, Kiana too and Hanneke, your advice is precious, because we're, you know, beginner sailors. So we're not building this with a huge understanding of sailing in mind. And we, you know, we can go, wow, yeah, catch rig looks great, and we understand the dynamics of
catch
that.
rig is a good cruising rig generally. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, you mean catch rig with Bermudan sails on it?
Yeah.
Because you can have also a catch rig with the wing sails on it. You can have a catch rig where the aft sail is smaller than the forward one, and things like that. Also possible.
Personally, I've you know, have, like, Maranoka, when I bought it, was a catch rig Bermuda sail. I removed the mizzen mast before I started sailing it, so I didn't have much experience with both masts. Then I just kept the main mast, normal Bermuda sail. Fantastic for going into the wind. Wonderful for going into the wind. Not so efficient for going downwind compared to what I have now, which is the Gunter rig. And I must say, it's much nicer going downwind than into the wind. So if you're going to, like, prime yourself and prime your boat for a specific kind of sailing, I would recommend downwind. The other thing that I prefer of at least the Gunter rig, and I'm sure the wing sail is a lot more similar, is that it's something awful reefing a normal Bermuda sail and having to pull into the wind and have the whole sail flap, 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 and it's just so loud and pulling, like, that was never my favorite thing. And now with the Gunter rig, it's so much smoother and quieter, and you have a lot more room to play on whether you want to go all the way into the wind to reef it, or you don't have to necessarily. You can even, on light winds, pull the sail up and down, downwind.
Well, that's what we can do with the wing sail rig. We can
exactly. Yeah.
Without
So a
course,
Bermuda.
we just.
Yeah, Bermuda rig. I don't know. It's
I
nice.
haven't used one for years again, so I'm a bit rusty.
Well, if we did the wing sail rig, it's two masts, but then the uniqueness
you could have
is
the
no
aft one
boom,
smaller.
right?
You could go for a more catch actually than equal size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, no
obviously wanting to keep the Otto and Obi as well, like part of our thinking and the philosophy of Wharram is to keep all of the boat and how it operates as simple as possible. I saw a great interview with, is it Matt who has the boat that they did the Savage Waters. I can't think of the name
Oh
of
yes,
the boat.
yes, Mad Night. Yes.
I saw an interview with him, and he's talking about they have the wing sail rig
Yes,
on
they
their
do.
Pahi 53,
52. Yeah.
52, and he said, you know, like the great thing about the whole boat and Wharrams in general that stick to the philosophy is like when you're out at sea and things break, you know, with a knife and a bit of rope, you can basically fix anything. And I did see a video of Regan, who has a Narai and had been refitting it. She has a cool channel called She Sails Solo.
Yeah, I know
and I saw
her.
a video where, you know, the sails getting stuck in the tracks. And I was saying to Remy, that's exactly kind of what I would like to avoid is then you've got to fix all this metal work and.
Exactly. I had with my old mast, there was a time where the rivets for the track were coming out. And so I would have to pull the sail up and climb up the mast and tie a rope around to hold the track onto the mast.
Oh, that's awful. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
really people
enjoy...
have these masts with built-in tracks, of course. And nowadays you can get all sorts of fancy ball-bearing cars to pull your sails up, but it gets incredibly expensive when you use this high-tech kit, which they use on these big Bermudan sails, and you know the cost is just huge compared to a simple wing sail rig or gunter rig like. I think the wing sail probably better to windward. The wing sail rig is actually very good to windward, but also downwind. So
probably
your rig is even cheaper and simpler, and you can have your sort of just grown spars, which is lovely. But the wing sail rig, you do have. I mean, we tried a junk sail out in the Pacific, which we made in. Well, we got bamboos cut in New Zealand, and we had simple tarp material, and we finally assembled one of these sails in Fiji, thinking we would put our nice, expensive wing sail away out of the hot tropical sun and sail with something simpler. So we hoisted this sail on our mainmast and sailed out of Fiji. And I was appalled. We were going sideways as much as forward. And I really didn't like the sail. You know, they say it's easy to reef, but maybe because it's so big on a boat like that, the weight of it, the top of the sail got really flat because of the weight hanging off it. And then the bottom panels curved more. And then the sheets were really complicated. You know, it was all this spaghetti string. We had one set of sheetlets. But the problem, if you have one set, is if you jibe, there's no control of it. It flops right over. And in fact, one of our first runs was dead downwind, and we had to do some dog legs through the reef. And we had to jibe, and it was quite a strong wind, and it flopped over and immediately broke a batten on the rigging. And so then we made a whole second set of sheetlets, and then when the sail came down, you had all these battens across your deck and all these bunches of spaghetti at the end, and it clogged up the whole platform. Whereas our wing sail rig, we drop it, we curl it up, and we swing it right off the deck sideways, out of the way, nothing there. Wonderful. You've seen? No, you have not seen that on Gaia because there are no sails on it. But,
it's really interesting how many Wharrams are out there now doing this. The mast on each hull and
I don't know how good that is.
I've heard good things. Like there's this guy sailing around with Hans and his whole little
the Tiki 46 thing, wasn't it?
And he said he was the quickest out of all of them sailing.
Wow.
Which I don't know if that's a lie, you know.
I don't know either.
Hanneke, what's the setup of Pilgrim? Pilgrim was the.
Let's not talk about Pilgrim right now because I have some terrible news about it.
Yeah, that's true. That's new owners too, right? Like that's not the original.
It's a bit of an asshole. I had some messages from Hans just yesterday about it.
Oh, you got the photos?
Yeah,
I saw it in the group.
Yeah, he sent me some photos yesterday, and I'd seen some on Facebook already. But his boat was nearly wrecked in Mallorca when we were in Mallorca. For last. It was anchored there. He'd left it on an anchor. It was a local chap to keep an eye on it, but it was just on one anchor, and a not very good anchor. And it had dragged already once. And when we were there, it was a strong wind came in, and we actually moved out of its path in case it dragged because we were told that boat might drag. So we re-anchored elsewhere, and the next morning we woke up and we found pilgrim on the other side of the harbour, nudging into some rocks. So
Well,
we
the
helped.
reason I brought it up was not to, talk about the bad news. That was bad timing. But in the,
Makes me angry.
and this is obviously going to be publicly shared, so I don't want to upset anyone any more than they're already going to be. But in the video of that has a huge amount of views on YouTube, the building of Pilgrim and their first sail.
Oh, yeah, so
I mean,
that's
they
sail
hit
across the
record
Atlantic.
speeds, and so that's why I was asking if you can remember what the setup was of the rig.
Oh, that was the standard wing sail rig with 2 equal
Yep.
sized sails.
Yep.
No, he
Right.
sailed with that always. That worked fine. Actually, on the smaller ones, they are quite easy to handle. Yeah,
And they
on
had
Gaia, they're a
aluminium
bit large,
telephone,
so
I think.
you need more crew. But like even the Hecate, my knight's boat, he handles those sails single-handed. They're a lot smaller than our sails, and they don't seem to be
Okay, yeah.
much of an issue. And on your boat, they won't be particularly large.
Okay, let's because I am conscious we're going to run out of time soon, but it would be great.
Crossbeams. I would like to discuss crossbeams, actually,
Please.
which we haven't touched on. You've got the drawings of, you're going to build a sort of I-section beam, aren't you? With a ply web.
Yeah.
And
Right.
again, the best timber for that is, say, Douglas fir, for those
Okay.
flanges, top and bottom. Because Douglas fir is very resilient. It's very good in tension and compression. And in fact, one little, for instance, Dutch windmills, they were made all out of wood, everything, all the cogwheels and the drive shafts, all made of wood. And they use different species for all different parts. But the main drive shaft, which ran vertically from the windmill down to the bottom to drive whatever machinery they had at the bottom, grinding stones, they were Douglas, and they were on twist. And they would always use Douglas fir trees for that main draft shaft because it could take that torsion.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
I built 2 new beams for Maranoka when I was on the hard, and they are made out of Douglas fir.
Yeah.
They're not the I section, the way that they're supposed to be, but they're working.
They're laminated. They're
So-
laminated straightforward beams, like they are on the original design, actually.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Pascal's
Yeah.
point about the Douglas fir when we were talking about it, because my understanding is a maritime pine is like a European version of the Douglas, right?
Yeah.
Was just the it grown here, it's completely different ecosystem and environment to Canada, and that it's obviously not the same durability and amazingness of the Canadian original Douglas fir.
Yeah.
But again, I guess epoxying everything is going to give us the additional strength.
But on the beam, not
On the beams, yeah. That I
Yeah,
guess
but
that's
it will vary in strength, the actual timber, and the timber is the important bit on the beams.
Otto and Obi have to go.
Glassing
So
there doesn't do.
And
You're
if
going
you
away,
can share maybe a
bye.
book or like some knowledge that you recommend for like boat building, or if you think about anything like that, I will appreciate if you have some.
Well,
Otto and
can I
Obi
just go back?
catch up again soon. Hanneke, we'll hang on and we'll keep going a bit. Thank you,
okay.
guys.
Bye. The Douglas fir, the thing is, you want to look at it too. The better Douglas fir, the finer the grain, the better and the stronger.
Yeah.
You look at the little lines on it. If they're really close together, that's your best Douglas fir. The wider apart they are, if it's grown too fast, it's far less strong. Kiana is walking
Yeah,
about.
I'm not sure mine is the best.
All right. You can have a look.
Here. Can we see? So I've joined it here. These are because I couldn't get a piece that was wide enough, so I had to buy 2 of them.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can.
Yeah, so
It's
they're
not-
quite big chunks, in fact. They're not thin laminations.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
they're pretty. It looks like it was quickly grown.
Mm.
So I don't know how long it'll last, but so far so good. my previous beams were some sort of South American hardwood, Ipe, something purple, like Purple Heart, very, very heavy, very hard.
Yeah.
And 2 of them cracked. And I had them milled, and I reused them to fix stringers and build lots of things. But then, so it's quite a difference between the 2 other old beams that I have still that are some sort of hardwood, very hardwood, and this Douglas fir now. But they're holding up all right. And the one Douglas fir, the one I just showed you, the beam, it's actually my mast beam, so it has a lot of pressure on it from different points.
Well,
I have to go, so I say bye-bye. I have to pick up the little one. So
okay.
It was nice to have you.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, I need to go and have a pee very soon, so
Well, it was fantastic. I think that's a really good starting point, and I love, you know, the way that we're doing this really naturally and sort of like having your experience and the sharing of stories like throughout. So I look forward to the follow-up in a few months when we're going to probably have started building.
Not probably, we will.
Remy said not probably, we will, but also like addressing the elephant in the room of the sheathing, because what I discovered was that like the nylon sheathing that a lot of people recommend, the cast cover, is not made anymore. That was under the same, I think, company as West, or the parent company. So it's not, because of resource scarcity, I think they stopped making it. But yeah, I think that whole sheathing discussion needs an entire separate meeting.
Go and research Dyneema cloth, which has been used with epoxy quite a bit.
Oh,
Some people have mentioned that.
Oh.
I've been in contact with the person who's bought Ruawaka in New Zealand, a Pi 63, and is restoring it.
Okay,
and, he showed me horrific pictures. This was sheath with epoxy and most likely what do you call it?
The Dyneema, the cast cover.
No, not Dyneema. What is it? No, hang on, I've got the wrong. Dyneema is the rigging. No, not Dyneema. What's the bloody stuff called now? It's some other stuff.
The thing made out of stone? No.
No. I will look it up. But that sheathing seemed to have stuck well, the stuff which I mean. But the chap had done about 10mm thick plastering over the top, which started to come off in chunks.
Yeah.
So he had to peel it all off, because I don't know why this chap sort of fed it in with so much material. There was literally 10mm thick filler on top.
And then it also comes down to, like, from the perspective of why not use glass, and if we're thinking of not using.
Oh, no, it's Dynel cloth. Dynel. D-Y-N-E-L. Dynel cloth. I've never actually. I think it's a sort of polypropylene or some sort of.
Yeah, there's no research into the impact on marine ecosystems of the other materials either. We would love to try and do that. Then it comes down to thinking about if all of these materials, especially because they're, you know, plastic base, if they're going to have some kind of impact, presumably, then we should be really thinking about what is actually going to last the longest.
Absolutely.
And Hanneke, your you know, remind us and everyone that the purpose of sheathing the outside is for longevity, right? It's not for the actual structural strength.
No, not the strength. Well, on the Pahis, where we don't have such a solid keel, the extra layers around the keel are for strength.
Mm-hmm.
But even so, the internal structure is also strong, but it's durability. Low down on the keels, you can have more layers for more scratch and damage resistance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we scraped our Gaia across a reef, and that thicker glass on the bottom was ideal because we had some big long scratches, but it never went through and into the plywood.
Yeah, I've got some of those.
Yeah, he went and explored a bit of reef.
I think that's the point of it, Angie, is it's using what's going to last the longest, because you are building this heritage piece, this vessel that, you know, can, like using Maranoka as an example, though it does not like being in the rainforest, and so I'm doing it a huge disservice by being in Brazil. But still, you know, in the desert, for example, it would last another 50 years easily, and you have this thing that brings a lot of joy and sails around and gets passed down between generations, and the impact at the end of the day, as long, and if there's some sort of disposal plan, I think that's something that worries me about selling Maranoka. Is my biggest fear is having someone get it and then want to do a huge refit again, but without the knowledge of what it actually needs to sail well, you know, and at least I had that before I started, and it dying in a boatyard or dying floating here because someone's too afraid to take it out or whatever. So the disposal, the end life, is something that I'm thinking about with Maranoka at the moment, because it's either I'm going to sell it or I'm not. And if I'm not, eventually it's not going to be able to sail anymore or as frequently as I would like it to. And so then what happens to it, you know? And I think that a boat with so much story and history, something really cool can happen to it. It can become a playground. That's my little.
Hey, they're doing that. That is a legitimate use case of it. Actually, that brings me to a point that I have a paper that I'll share in the notes from this, is that John Summerscales' new paper on sustainability considerations for end-of-life fiber-reinforced plastic boats is now being published. And he sort of looks at, you know, all of the considerations for end-of-life boats. But you touch on a point that I want to bring up quickly before we leave, in that I have this envelope full of letters from a gentleman who started writing to Dr. Corinna, and she forwarded me the letters for safekeeping and because I might be able to use them in the greater storytelling of this project. But essentially, the long story short is that this gentleman had this boat, and I forgot the name of it right now, but it was his love, you know, this boat. And eventually he sold it, but he had a lot of great memories and stories from this boat. And then he sold it because he wanted a bigger boat, a newer boat, a flashier boat. And one day when he was an older man, he was walking along the beach in the UK, and there was his beloved wrecked and abandoned. And he was horrified, and that really brought him to the issue of what happens to boats when, you know, they go to die, especially fiberglass boats. And it's what actually drew the correspondence with him, is what drew Corinna to explore abandoned boats as a source of fiberglass contamination when she was, you know, finding it in the mussels and the oysters in her research. So, you know, when we're exploring sustainability and can boat building be regenerative, like, of course, humans are a consumptive species, and building a boat, any kind of boat, is not necessarily a sustainable endeavor, but we have to look at it from a macro perspective. I mean, Kiana, you live full time on this boat. Your footprint and impact is so much less. And you and I are going to talk about this more in a little interview we're going to do.
Your living impact, because you're
not
living then, on the land, you consume far more, and
the message that
sets
you're
off against
to other people,
the use of your fiberglass. And if your boat can last, you know, 30, 40 years, you know, like Gaia, if you keep on maintaining it and making certain that, I mean, Gaia can last a long time yet, as long as I keep the maintenance up and don't let it just deteriorate, you know, catch any problems while they're small and deal with them. And that way,
it's a beautiful part of building a Wharram as well, like from our experiences. I mean, we only have this little model baby so far, and we're so attached to it. And I can see how this is going to become, like, I mean, Hanneke, in an interview, you describe Gaia as yours and James's offspring. And I totally can see how that becomes.
Yeah,
you know,
I can't imagine selling Gaia. It would be very difficult as to who to sell it to. You know, it's got to be somebody responsible. I mean, you can see what happened to Pilgrim. It got sold to somebody who's just not, you know, taking care in the right way. You know, it's careless. You know, people are, and that can so easily happen. It gets in the hands of somebody else, and it gets neglected, or or wrecks because it's more badly, improperly somewhere.
Yep.
That would be sad.
Yeah, the bigger picture, I think, where we can finish off here is thinking about the greater lifestyle, what this boat, particularly for us, is going to bring is like not just to our family, but to community. We're already doing this. We're already bringing people together to exchange ideas and knowledge. And I think that's the really beautiful thing about Wharrams, and obviously the legacy of Polynesian voyaging, and these boats that have the capacity to bring people together. So anyway, I think that's going to be it for today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
It's
waking
lovely
up
chatting to
early,
you.
Kiana and Hanneke joining us.
Yeah, so cool. There's so much to talk about, so I'm looking forward to doing this more often.
Yeah, every 3 months might be too far apart. Maybe we have to do it like every 6 weeks or something, every couple months.
I'm so pleased you're building that model. I think that was the right decision, wasn't it?
Definitely.
Also for Remy, because he now learns how the whole actual physical process goes, not just the shapes and all the rest, but the actual physical.
And when you start to put the stringers on, you can see it, how it gets its strength. It's really fascinating. It was kind of like a little bit flimsy with the bulkheads attached to the back home. And then you start to piece it all together and you just start to feel like that this boat is going to be really strong.
Yeah, when you build, of course, you want to attach all your frames to the ground somehow.
Yes.
So they don't move, and line them up with a bit of string, because you can easily put a bend in it if you don't do it carefully. And,
all right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Lovely to talk. And till next time.
Enjoy your beautiful day on Maranoka in the sunshine.
Yeah,
Very
we're here
jealous.
in the rain again. It starts
It's cold
another
here
rainy
too.
day today. But the daffodils are coming up and they will flower in a bit.
I wish I could send you some of this heat that's about to be here for the next couple of days.
Well, maybe too much. You can have too much of everything. Okay, bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, Hanneke.